I'm Beth Larson, and I have my own company called Sierra Consulting Group, and I am a clinical psychologist. So I work in a private practice where I might meet with somebody one-on-one, much like this, and learn a little bit more about what they're struggling with and how I can help. My family grew up in theater, and theater is a very psychological area. There's often psychology that gets brought in, whether it's a teaching style or pretending to be somebody who's blind for a day, or really thinking about how an apple smells or tastes. It's very close to what we call mindfulness today. And so I was interested in that part of the theater experience, as well as interested in how different and addictive being on stage was, and how much juice I got out of that. But I also realized that that juice was a little bit manic depressive. It was very up and down and unstable. It was really hard to figure out who you are separate from the theater and the role or the process that you're doing at that time. So that's probably the main thing that got me into it. And then I grew up in children's theater, and at the time that my sisters are 10 years older, at the time that my sisters were there, it was a rather abusive environment. So there was child sexual abuse going on between many of the lead people and the children. And I was too young to be aware of it, but as I grew older, I was fascinated by the fact that all of these parents were aware to a certain extent and chose not to do anything. And I had gone to school at Williams, and Williamstown has a great theater program, and McAllister as well. And then I went to film in the city, and I was working back at children's theater in sound design. And it just kind of all came full circle for me. And that became more interesting to me than actually the theater itself.
So
I began as a performance artist, yes. And then, because I went to Mac, you choose cores. So I had 3 cores. I had women's studies, theater, and performance arts. And so it's actually women's studies that I based my graduate degree on in clinical psychology. There were 2 things that happened. One, it was kind of like, these were the classes that I was drawn to and interested, and these are the classes that I did well in. So sociology, psychology, anthropology, but you know what, a lot of it, in fairness, I'm like, okay, I need an easy class to go with. I have a judging or jury trial that I have to do for an opera I gotta work on. I want something that I can just be kind of fluff. And what was easy for me to do is how I ended up with that triple core. So, but the other thing I really got fascinated by was women's studies and how women in other cultures struggle, or how we don't even realize we're objectified. All of that information, social justice, also became very fascinating to me. So, when you're in theater, I did a lot of modeling. I was in a position where I was very objectified, and I had a new way, a new framework to look at that. And I kind of came out of that modeling actress singer and went all the way over to feminist women's study. So that was one piece. And then I had a girlfriend of mine, as I'm like looking at going back to yet another school, said, why don't you just volunteer? And that was great advice. What are you interested in? Go do it as a volunteer. See if you like that field. And that's how I switched over. So my girlfriend suggested, she said, you like kids, go volunteer in Big Brother, Big Sister. So I did that. It was a fiasco. All I did is buy children's stuff, which is not what being a big sister was really about. But then I went and worked with Sexual Violence Center. And that was a huge changing point in my life, because there I learned so much more about that social justice and women's studies, and how our culture, and all of the things going back to children's theater, so much of that made more sense to me in this context. And I thought, how can I do more of this? And I could be an advocate, I could go into legal, or I could go into psychology. So that's when I went back and did my grad program in psychology. I love my job. That's a really fun, I mean, I'm interested in the testing we get to do. You know, I'm kind of a sucker if there's like a Vogue quiz or something about who you are. I want to know that. I just am interested in that stuff that tells us who we are on different levels than what we wear, who we're married to, where we live, but more of the core things about what make us the individual that we are today. But I'm also interested in how we motivate ourselves, how we motivate others, what things work, because so much of what we intuitively think will work doesn't. So for me to just tell you what to do to have a better life, anybody can do that. It's how you are able to facilitate somebody actually doing those things that makes a difference, and that's the part that I think is fascinating. But I mean, it's a great job. I get to sit and chat, and I get paid. You know, that's pretty cool. That's fun.
So,
the other thing that I really like about my type of psychology is that I have a ton of flexibility. So when I started looking at having children and a family, I knew that I wanted a job. I wanted to be able to work, and I didn't want to have to work full-time really intensely. I wanted to be able to have more balance. So I'm able to schedule my patients for time, you know, pretty minimal amount of time that I'm actually doing one-to-one. And then I can do paperwork or any of those things anytime. So that doesn't necessarily have to be, that can be, you know, at my kitchen table. I can be doing that, or I have an office. You know, you do have to have locks and everything, but that's a pretty flexible job. That's hard to find.
yeah, like
So, school psychologist is somebody who does a lot of testing, a lot of ADD testing, and learning disabilities, a lot of testing of children, but also a lot of work with kids in a school. That's another fun area, I would think. But there are psychologists in every hospital and every clinic with elder care, with rehab. Then there's forensic psychology and the research that goes around that. That's a huge area and very interesting. And it's not just what's the evidence or doing an evidentiary after a rape. It may be what do we do with sex offenders? How long do we have them in a facility? Or how do we process materials? Or how do we make somebody who's been victim of a crime more supported so that they're able to become the best witness we need to keep our society safe? There's so many facets of psychology. I find that really, really cool. My husband is an entrepreneur. It's just flexibility. So I learned how to do this in a clinic where I was, in essence, giving away 40% of my income to the clinic to do my billing, to have paperwork available to me for referrals and office space. And I'm like, well, office space is cheap, and I can get my own referrals, and I have more money. So it was just easier. I got to be my own boss. It was not that hard to do. And when I looked at the finances of what I'm paying the clinic to be in essence, if I were to bring all the money in that the patient pays, or the insurance company and the patient pay, why wouldn't I just do this myself? Well, you don't have a boss, so you got to do your own taxes. You have to keep track of things that I don't like keeping track of. I do have a billing person because that's not something I'm interested in doing, but you're responsible for it. So that sense of, oh boy, did I do this, or is that right? I don't have anybody else looking over my shoulder. What I do have is other colleagues that I meet with once a month, and then we go over what are changes coming up, what are changes in the diagnostic system. Obamacare has created good things and difficult things. So my job will change radically as a result of being more tied to other hospitals. So now all of our notes have to be done electronically and in a way that other people can access it. I've been very slow to adapt to that. Now, as a small business, I can be slow, but I'm on my own. Nobody's buying that system for me. So I work in collaboration with other independent psychologists to figure that out a little bit. I guess I'd say go be a social worker instead. You can do therapy at probably the same rate, get the same money that I get from insurance companies as a social worker. And in that, you can take your license anywhere, and it's a little easier job to get. You can do more of the social advocacy, but you can also do the therapy. And then the other piece of it that's pretty common for licensed independent clinical social workers is that they'll do the rehab as well. The thing I like about a psychologist is that you get to do the testing. You can do industrial organizational. I mean, how we shop in a store is a form of psychology. They can do research. They can do more if you know exactly what you want to do as a psychologist. But to be more broad and a little bit more flexible, I would be a social worker.
This field.
I think if you're interested in, I think it's a great field, and I think that we're going to see job security in it as baby boomers, as people age. There's going to be more of it, and it'll become more integrated. They're now putting psychologists in lifetime clinics, or lifetime fitness. So we'll see it much more available, and I think much less taboo. Now there's still taboo about, I think, going to get help, or the stigma of mental illness, and I think we'll see that really shift. There's a big boom in life coaching because it doesn't have the stigma. And I mean, that's good. I think however people get help, I want to make sure that the people that are offering the help are really qualified, have been vetted.